Hi guys, wanted to do part two. I've titled this Always Learning, and it's based around Luke 5, verses 1 to 11. Now, in our everyday lives, we generally have a routine. We get up the same way, get prepared the same way. We take the same route to work and carry out our work in pretty much the same way. Very often, the way we do things is very much tried and tested. We'll get comfortable in these routines. We know what works for us. We're pretty much experts in our own life. I know it doesn't always feel like that, but in terms of routine, we are. Um, you know, Experiences that we gain over the years tells us the right way and best way to do the things we do. And sometimes we have to change that routine, and it's not an easy thing to do. It's really difficult. I'll give you an example. Looking in Luke at the account of Jesus calling his first disciples, for whatever reason, Jesus decides he's going to preach from a boat. And when he's finished, he says to Simon, "Put out into deep water and let down your nets." Now, I enjoy fishing myself. I go whenever I can. Not been that easy to do this year. But very often when I go to the same places. When I get there, I know which pegs are going to give me the best days fishing. I know from those pegs where to cast my bait. I even sort of know what time of day is best to cast out where. So I've got this experience really, and all this experience of fishing there and doing things a certain way and having this routine. It all increases my chances. And the same could be said for Simon. He knew how to fish. In Scripture, we see he'd been out all night. The nets that they used in those times were linen and specifically designed to be used at night. The lower light levels would have made the nets a lot harder to see, and the fish were generally more active as it was easy for them to avoid predators. So being asked to cast nets in the day would have seemed a little bit backwards to Simon. Peter also knew where to fish. He'd fished on the Sea of Galilee probably every day of his working life. He'd got more than a lifetime's knowledge, really, about places to fish, because we know from Scripture that his father was a fisherman, and he would have taught him absolutely everything he knew. Simon would have also been fairly successful at his job. His father could not only afford to live, but they also had the means to afford the upkeep of the nets, which, because they were linen, were very prone to breaking, very prone to weaknesses, and when they got wet, they'd rot very easily. So it would have taken a lot of upkeep to keep these nets going. But not only that, his family also owned a boat. Now, the boat wouldn't have been cheap. It wouldn't have been, it wouldn't have been something everybody had. They had it because they needed it, and in order to get it, they'd have had to have some measure of success in catching fish and being good fishermen. So, looking at this routine idea that Simon would have known, I've got to fish at night, I've got to fish in a certain place. It would have seemed very strange to him, Jesus saying, just go out there into deep water and let down your nets. And as I said, it's quite interesting, because to Simon, this would have appeared that Jesus just picked a spot out at random, wrong time of day. Nets aren't designed to be used in the day. The fish are more likely to be able to see them. And after a night of catching nothing, it's less than ideal. And also, don't forget that the Scripture tells us that what they were doing when Jesus called them over. They're actually washing the nets. So these nets needed maintenance. They weren't even in the best condition. Like I've said before, linen nets required a lot of work, a lot of mending, a lot of cleaning. They're prone to rot, so you couldn't leave them to get wet. You couldn't keep them wet. You had to dry them out and only have them get wet when you're actually using them. But now in all this, Simon puts his faith in Jesus. He goes out to the spot, lets down the net. Now, Scripture says he'd been out all night and not caught anything. Yet suddenly the nets begin to fill, and it said that the number of fish was so great, the nets began to break. There were so many fish, they had to call in a second boat. And when they'd finally managed to recover the nets, the number of fish filled both boats to the point at which they began to sink. What we see next is the true extent of this miracle. Simon would have seen good days fishing in his life, and he'd have also seen the bad, but he'd never seen a catch like this. It's his best catch ever. The haul was so abundant that Simon falls at Jesus' feet and on his knees pleads with Jesus to leave him because he's not worthy. I know this passage is quite famous really for the I will make you fishers of men quote, but there's another lesson here. I know that I've spoke about Jesus' abundance before, and we see it again here with the sheer volume of fish. But what we also see is how Jesus takes a man in his everyday routine, turns his tried and tested methods upside down and on the head, and he creates a greater reward, a best catch that even Simon, who'd fished every day of his life, had never seen before. And I think the message here is very important. It's when you apply Jesus to your everyday life, you have to sort of like break the mold of your own life, because your life on your own doesn't fit the mold of Jesus. They're two completely different things. So you have to kind of look at the same thing, the same everyday life, in a new way. And when you do that, that's where Jesus starts to work, by throwing all the earthly expertise out the window and just trusting in Jesus. Everything we do from that point on can enrich our lives in a way which, despite our earthly experiences, despite our earthly knowledge, we couldn't imagine that. And that's the power of Jesus. Jesus turned fishers of fish into fishers of men. And through Jesus, you've sort of got to ask yourself, knowing what I can do, knowing my skill set, knowing what I do in a daily routine, what can I achieve by breaking the mold, letting Jesus in and saying, how are we going to do this? How are we going to go about this? What's the best way? And by doing that through prayer, I think you'll be truly amazed at how things can just open up your eyes to possibilities you've never seen before, just in your everyday lives. Jesus doesn't want to just save. He doesn't want us to just be righteous through him. He doesn't even want to make you a good person or a great person. He wants you to be your best person. The greatest person you can be in who you are and what you do. You can't do that by yourself. You can't keep, even if you got to that point, you couldn't keep that up 24/7. Even a good person, you can't be that 24/7. But you can be at your best, and the only way to do that is through Jesus. So I just encourage you to break the mold, let Jesus in, use Jesus' blueprint, look at things in a new way with Jesus, and just go with it, because it's the only way you will ever be the best person you can be. You can't do it on your own, so do it with Jesus.